There didn't seem to be any question in the jurors' minds that Dr. William Baxter Waddill Jr. had strangled Mary's baby in the hospital nursery. The question was whether Mary's baby was even a baby. This is Christina with the Sisyphean Journal, and today is March 2nd. So, most people presented with a newborn infant, even a premature infant, breathing, gasping, crying, wiggling, is going to say, "Oh my God, let's take care of this baby." They're going to take the baby to the hospital nursery and they are going to take care of that baby in keeping with any medical protocols for a premature baby, right? That's not how things work in abortion land. And there were some nurses in abortion land who were a bit perplexed at the sight of a baby, and there were a couple of jurors that managed to get sucked into abortion land. Or who knows, maybe they kind of lived there already. So we're going to go back to 1977. Mary was a high school student, and she was examined by her OBGYN in February of 1977, and she was diagnosed as being 28 weeks pregnant. And even in 1977, this was a viable infant. If Mary's baby was born alive, they could take Mary's baby to the nursery and provide support to the baby, who could probably grow up to be an adult, maybe with some health problems, but the baby would survive. So the OBGYN suggested that Mary should make an adoption plan. Well, for some reason, Mary did not pursue that line. Instead, she found out that 43-year-old Dr. William Baxter Waddill Jr. would be perfectly willing to perform an abortion, even though her baby was past the age of viability. He justified the third trimester abortion on mental health grounds, checked Mary into Westminster Community Hospital in Orange County, California, and started the saline abortion. That's when the doctor uses one of those big amniocentesis needles, pulls out as much amniotic fluid as he can, and replaces it with a strong sterile salt solution. This method of abortion had been invented in the 1930s in the Soviet Union, and it was adopted widely in Japan after World War II, but they quickly abandoned it because it had a propensity to have one of two consequences that definitely was not wanted. One is that sometimes it failed to kill the baby, and the other is sometimes it succeeded in killing the baby and also killed the mother. So they abandoned that technique in Japan. Eventually, other countries began abandoning it, but American abortionists embraced it because it was fairly easy to do. You just check the woman into a ward, and in the early 1970s, a lot of abortions were still being done in hospitals, not outpatient. Pull out the fluid, put the saline in, wash your hands of it, let the nurse deal with it. So the fact that this could cause major brain injury to the mother if the salt got into her bloodstream, the fact that it could kill her, evidently that wasn't something that they really gave a lot of thought to. Why am I not surprised? Well, at any rate, Waddill initiated the abortion early on the morning of March 2nd of 1977 and left expecting that Mary would expel the dead baby within about 24 to 36 hours. Mary did expel a 2-pound, 8-ounce baby girl that evening, and one of the nurses found the baby. Now, of course, the nurse was expecting to find a dead baby, clamp the cord, put it in a bucket, send it off to the pathology lab. However, she noticed that the baby was moving and crying. So she was a bit perplexed. Again, remember, this is abortion land. This is not someplace where you look at a live baby and say, "Oh, this is a live baby. We take care of live babies." She asked another nurse what she should do. The second nurse, who also lived in abortion land, said, "Just put it in a bucket and send it to the pathology lab." A third nurse decided she wasn't going to get involved at all. So nurse number one wasn't really comfortable with the idea of sending a live baby to the pathology lab. So she consulted with a nursing supervisor, and I get the feeling the nursing supervisor oversaw the OBGYN ward and not just the abortion patients, because she did not live in abortion land. She took the baby down to the nursery and asked for help intubating the baby, putting in a breathing tube to help the baby. And this was perfectly normal nursery care for a baby that size and that gestational age. She wasn't doing anything spectacular with this baby. She also called the mother's doctor, Dr. Waddill, to let him know that the baby had been born and was in the nursery. When Waddle arrived at the hospital, he chased everybody out, and several witnesses heard him say, "Don't do a goddamn thing for the baby." An ER doctor who somehow heard what was going on poked his head in and saw Waddle squeeze the umbilical cord when he described what happened as the child jerked its body and gasped for air. Now, it seems that Waddle had been prepared for the birth of a living baby. He just had not been prepared for somebody to be trying to provide care to the baby. He called a pediatrician, Dr. Ronald Cornelson. For some reason, this phone call between Waddle and Cornelson was recorded. Waddle said, "If we all tell the same story, there will be no trouble. So long as we stand together, no one anywhere can make any accusations anywhere. Do not get squirrely. Just tell them exactly as we've discussed. Just say you went in, there was no heartbeat, and you left." Now, evidently, Dr. Cornelson hadn't found it difficult to agree to do that when he and Waddle had had whatever conversation they'd had that Waddle was telling him not to get squirrely about. But when he got to the hospital and looked and saw a 31-week baby, as he judged it, breathing and with a heart rate of 60 to 70, he wasn't prepared to just say that this was a dead baby. There were bruises on this baby's neck. Now, Cornelson later testified that when he walked in, Waddle said, "Sorry to get you into this mess. We had a baby that came out live from a saline abortion, and it can't live." Cornelson said that he saw Waddle pressing on the baby's neck, saying, "I can't find the goddamn trachea, and this baby won't stop breathing." Cornelson said that he asked Waddle why he couldn't just leave the baby alone. And Waddle told him, "This baby can't live or it will be the biggest mess you ever saw." He said that the baby would have suffered brain damage from the saline. There would be big lawsuits and it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to support the baby. Cornelson testified that Waddle asked for potassium chloride so he could give the baby a lethal injection. Cornelson told the nurse not to get it. Cornelson said that Waddle suggested that maybe he should overdose the baby on insulin and then asked for a bucket so he could drown the baby. Fourth time was a charm. Waddle did manage to find the goddamn trachea and make the baby stop breathing. Now, Waddle later claimed that he hadn't strangled the baby. He had just been checking for a pulse, like this. And he said that she'd been dead before he even got to the hospital. And he also said that he'd acted in the best interests of both the mother and the baby. So, again, he was kind of hedging his bets. The baby was already dead. I was just checking its pulse. I was making sure they did not use any extraordinary measures to save a baby that was just going to die anyway. Well, because the baby had died in the nursery, not in abortion land, the baby went for an autopsy instead of to the incinerator. A pathologist examined the lungs of the baby and estimated that she'd been alive for about 30 minutes, which was in keeping with what the witnesses said. Now, saline causes capillaries to break down, and that gives saline-aborted babies a mottled and bruised look, but the pathologist said that the marks on the baby's neck were consistent with manual strangulation, not consistent with the kind of bruising you see in abortion babies. And he testified that, yes, there had been some damage by the saline, but it had been mainly the baby's small bowel and the placenta, there had not been sufficient injury that Mary's baby was going to die anyway from the effects of the abortion. The cause of death? Manual strangulation. Waddill's attorneys argued that they should be allowed to let the jurors know that Waddill was very concerned that the baby had suffered irreversible brain damage because of the saline abortion. Okay, you're allowed to bring that up. But the judge also instructed the jury that they could not take into account whether Mary's baby was going to have a disability. And that was entirely possible. Just about a little over a month after Mary's baby was strangled in that hospital in Orange County, in Los Angeles County, a baby was born in an abortion clinic after a saline abortion. But she was born in the middle of the night. Nobody told the doctor right away. They took her to a hospital. They took her outside of abortion land, 100% outside of abortion land. She wound up being adopted. She is Gianna Jessen, pro-life speaker. Yes, Gianna has cerebral palsy as a result of the saline that was supposed to kill her. But I would argue that she's a legitimate human being. The judge said, a child's right to medical treatment is not diminished by what the quality of the child's future life may be. The fact that you might wind up brain damaged or with cerebral palsy like Gianna Jessen is not reason to deny you care or to strangle you at birth. So over 13 weeks of testimony, the jurors heard the witnesses describe the 3 unsuccessful attempts to strangle the baby and the 4th attempt to strangle the baby, which succeeded. They heard about, well, maybe potassium chloride, maybe insulin. How about drowning the baby in a bucket? They went to be sequestered, and it was dragging out. They were having problems. I don't know why the man strangled the baby in front of witnesses. But the jury asked for clarification on a procedural point, and that's when either the judge or one of the attorneys stumbled across a definition of death that was on California's Health and Safety Code. That definition: total and irreversible cessation of brain function. Let's go back to the trial. A doctor testifying on Waddill's behalf argued that he had been right to chase the nurses away and keep them from providing care to Mary's baby. He said, "We call these babies monsters. These monsters are born and they continue to live for a while. They finally die, of course. They breathe and they have a heartbeat, but there is no brain function." 2 jurors decided that because nobody had actually performed any kind of assessment to verify specifically that Mary's baby had brain function, you could not conclude that strangling the baby had caused irreversible cessation of brain function, because you can't stop something that isn't there in the first place, right? So those 2 jurors held firm. There were 2 other jurors who didn't buy that line of reasoning. It's like, there's a baby, it's in the nursery, it's crying, it's wriggling, you are having to strangle it. The cause of death is manual strangulation. It seems pretty straightforward that the guy killed the baby. But they wound up hopelessly deadlocked. The 2 who went with the common sense, if the baby's wriggling and crying and you need to strangle it to get it to stop breathing, it's a living baby and you killed it. And the 2, well, you couldn't prove it was actually a baby. Maybe it was a monster. So there was a hung jury. There was a second trial, and I'm guessing the same thing happened again, because the only news coverage is just that he once again got a hung jury, and the prosecutors gave up on the case and just let it go. Now, as for Mary, she was called in to testify in both of Dr. Waddill's trials. And she didn't blame the nurses. She blamed Waddill. She later sued him, saying that she never would have consented to an abortion if she had known that this might happen, that she might give birth to a live baby. And she faulted him very much for strangling her baby. I have no idea how that court case turned out. If you're interested, let me know. I'll go to the trouble and expense of a docket search and track it down and find out. And the Waddill case is why I was so astonished at the vigor with which they pursued the Kermit Gosnell case. If a doctor can strangle a baby in a hospital nursery in front of witnesses, and an autopsy can find that, yes, the baby died of manual strangulation, and no, the baby was not mortally injured by the abortion, how are they going to convict somebody on a few frozen corpses and a couple of cell phone photos? But maybe it's that the laws changed, maybe it's that society changed, maybe it was the lawyers. I don't know. Maybe we can have a discussion about how Kermit Gosnell managed to be held accountable, but Waddle got to walk.